And this is Fintan Dunne reporting. You're very welcome. Thank you for joining us. And thanks also to our sponsor, as ever, neemwell.com. It's nature's gift. It's totally 100% natural from the neem tree of India. So it's a great alternative to products of the pharmaceutical industry. Check it out at Neemwell. That's NEEMWELL.com. Or you can skip all that and just go straight to Kathy and ask for her advice. That's KATHY at neemwell.com. And you are very welcome. So much to cover and so little time, but let's get straight to it. We'll be covering the CIA fakes and the use of the Holocaust to smear 9/11 later in this broadcast. But we'll start with the psychological warfare campaigns which are going on. There's so many of them, as you might expect, just a couple of months before a US election. But speaking of psychological warfare, let me update you on that terror plot in the United Kingdom. Insight Quest has updated us all, posting in the forum under the State Terror section that the New York Times article, "Details Emerge in British Terror Case," has been blocked from the United Kingdom readers. Anybody in the UK who attempts to read that article on the New York Times gets a message saying that, on advice of legal counsel, this article is unavailable to readers of the New York Times in Britain. That's because there is a law that prohibits publication of prejudicial information about defendants before they go to trial in the United Kingdom. Interestingly, that comes just a couple of days after an article in the London Guardian pointing out that ministers in the UK government had to tread a fine line in terms of what they could say publicly for fear of prejudicing a trial against the defendants. And the reason I'm saying all of that is because just a sneaky suspicion occurs to me that perhaps this is how they intend to wriggle out of the case against those arrested in the United Kingdom on the terror plot. They have, I think, handed them a reasonable grounds for seeking a verdict from the courts that a fair trial is impossible in this case. We'll see. Updating you also on another development in that London terror plot, Ryanair's chairman Michael O'Leary clearly has balls. He seems to be the only person with balls in the United Kingdom. He certainly is the only person with balls in the air industry in the United Kingdom, and he has followed through on his threat to sue the UK government over lost business due to that terror plot overreaction. He's suing them for $5 million. Michael O'Leary is, by all inside accounts, a completely ruthless bastard. It has to be said. The only reason he's suing the UK government is because they cost him money. And that's an unforgivable sin in Michael O'Leary's eyes. But what I find is interesting about it is his comments. He's speaking as if he was a leader of some kind of opposition to current government policy in the US or UK. Opposition leader Michael O'Leary publicly expressed frustration and scepticism, saying that the terrorists are laughing at us. He described the government's recently imposed security measures as farcical, Keystone Cop-like, completely insane and ineffectual. We are not in danger of dying at the hands of toiletries. Hey, imagine if there was a political leader out there on the TV saying that kind of stuff. Would you vote for him? Well, of course, that's why there isn't one, folks. Because if there was, you would vote for him and the game would be up. Anyhow, so that leaves it to Michael O'Leary to fight the Psy-War campaign on the terror plot. Of course, we have the continuing Psy-War campaign over the invasion of Iran, and that's been done using repetition. You don't have to believe that. It's like soap powder advertising. Doesn't matter if you believe it. What matters is that they just keep hammering it until it's the same as if you did. The Psy-War games everywhere. Then, of course, there's a Psy-War game against the left saying that there's going to be another 9/11. We covered that already. And the Psy-War game to tie up the left wing has finally reached endgame, with Richard Armitage fessing up that he spoke about Valerie Plame, blah, blah, blah. There you go. That's the end of that. And that means that all those people on the left spent the last 12 months when they could have been fighting the war, they could have been participating in the anti-war movement, in the usual intellectual head games. They've been had, yet again, just like with Jeff Gannon. And you know the funny thing? They don't even know it. You're very welcome back. You're on The Next Level on breakfornews.com. And the situation in Iraq, well, as you probably heard, 8 soldiers turns into 9 soldiers killed over the weekend, 4 more on Tuesday. It does appear that that deployment of US troops back into Baghdad was defensive in nature. It's reaching a critical stage now. resistance against US occupation has escalated continually since that occupation began and is now running at 90 attacks per day. Meanwhile, 10,000 people have died in Iraq over the last 4 months. 10,000 civilians have been killed. An awful lot of those 10,000 died as a result of horror unleashed by the Shia forces with the blessing of the US occupation, because it's tooth and nail now between the Sunni resistance and the US and Shia forces in Iraq. An interesting development that hasn't been reported widely is that Harith al-Dari, who is a leader of the Association of Muslim Scholars, the intellectual wing of the Iraqi resistance, has held out the olive branch, saying that he's ready for a meeting with Sistani, who is the leader of the Shia, and who is, by the way, to my mind, an operative of the British Crown, by the way. So that is a tentative offer from the Iraqi resistance to sit down and talk about the future of the country, as al-Dari put it, or in other words, how they all get themselves out of the hole that they've dug themselves into. And I wouldn't be surprised if the Sunni resistance keep this up all the way to the election in the United States. They're not dumb. Are you ready for a reality check on what's happening in Iraq? I know you'd love a reality check, but this is not for the faint-hearted. It's from a report in the Sunday Times magazine of last Sunday in the United Kingdom, an article entitled "You Wouldn't Catch Me Dead in Iraq." And it features interviews with deserters in Canada. Deserters like Darrell Anderson, aged 24. After fighting for 7 months in Iraq, he came home bloodied from combat with a Purple Heart. When I joined, he says, I wanted to fight. I wanted to see combat. I wanted to be a hero. I wanted to save people. I wanted to protect my country. Soldiers, he says, were describing to me how they'd beaten prisoners to death. I hate Iraqis, he quotes his peers as saying. I hate those damn Muslims. I can't kill these people. They're not terrorists. They're 14-year-old boys. They're old men. We're occupying the streets. We raid houses. We grab people. We send them off to Abu Ghraib where they're tortured. These are innocent people. Lance Corporal Ivan Brobeck, aged 21. You tend to be very angry over there because you're fighting for something you don't believe in and your friends are dying. I saw totally bad stuff that shouldn't have happened. I remember hearing something get thrown off the back of a 7-ton truck. They threw a detainee off the back, his hands tied behind his back and a sandbag over his head so he couldn't brace for the impact. I remember he started convulsing after he hit the ground. We took the bag off his head and his eyes were swollen shut and his nose was plugged with blood and he could barely breathe. Brobeck was also confounded by the regularity with which civilians were killed at checkpoints. My friends have been the ones who've done that, and after the event it's always, oh, so-and-so is a little down today, he killed a guy in front of his kids, or he killed a couple of kids. These are Marines that are my friends, who I talk to every day. It's hard knowing that your best friend has had to kill innocent people. I was only 17 when I signed my contract, and my whole childhood all I did was play video games and sports. I didn't pay attention to the news. That stuff was boring to me. But I know firsthand now. Joshua Key from Colorado, aged 28. He was assigned to raid houses. I mean, they're screaming and hollering out their lungs. It's traumatic on both parts because you've got somebody yelling at you, which might be a woman. You're yelling back at her, telling her to get on the ground or get out of the house. You completely destroy the home. Completely destroy it. If there's like cabinets or something that's locked, you kick them in. The soldiers take what they want, completely ransack it. He estimates he participated in about 100 raids. I never found anything in the home. You might find one AK-47, but that's for personal use. But I never found one of the big caches of weapons they're supposed to have, or I never found members of the Ba'ath Party, terrorists, insurgents. We never found any of that. We was going along the Euphrates River, he says. It's a road right in the middle of the city of Ramadi. We turn a sharp right and all I seen was decapitated bodies. The heads laying over here and the bodies over there and the US troops in between them. I'm thinking, oh my God, what in the hell happened here? What's caused this? Why in the hell did this happen? We get out and somebody was screaming, we fucking lost it here. I'm thinking, yes, somebody definitely lost it here. I see 2 soldiers kicking the heads around like soccer balls. I just shut my mouth and walked back, got inside the tank, shut the door and thought, I can't be no part of this. This is crazy. He's convinced there was no firefight. There was never no shells. He still can't get the scene out of his mind. You just see heads everywhere. You wake up, You'd just be sitting there like you're in a foxhole. I can still see Iraq just as clearly as the day I was there. You'd just be on the side of a little river running through the city, trash piled up, filled with dead. I don't sleep that much. His wife, Brandy, nods in agreement and says that he cries in his sleep. You're on the next level on breakfornews.com. This is Slow Reader and appropriately anaesthetic for the amputee. And you're very welcome back. You are on the next level on breakfornews.com, and I'll post links to that series of interviews with Canadian deserters telling what's really going on in Iraq in the forum. Just click on the photo that goes with this audio. And I think it's good to get a reality check like that about what it's really all about, because it comes out, for example, in the Valerie Plame thing, and you see all the gung-ho enthusiasm in the left-wing blogs about nailing Karl Rove, and you see the same sort of stuff going on in the right-wing blogs about nailing the Liberals, etc. So much of it's like just a game to people, especially at that superficial level of politics. But this isn't a fucking game. That in Iraq is the reality. So that gives a sort of an edge, doesn't it, to the ongoing battle with the CIA fakes. It's a year now, a little over a year, since we outed them here on breakfornews.com. So let's just see how they've developed over that year, where they've gone and what they're currently up to. Well, just in passing, one of the little sideshows that they're running right now is the break-in at the offices of Mike Ruppert and his departure to South America to flee from the federales. Meanwhile, we also have a reporter, if you'll pardon me using the word reporter and American Free Press in the one sentence. We have a reporter for American Free Press, Christopher Berlin, who was allegedly beaten up by the police. So clearly there's an operation there to spread fear. There's nothing unusual about that. They do that all the time. And the departure of Mike Ruppert, very interesting. I think it does signal the terminal phase of the controlled demolition of the 9/11 movement. However, right now, the big thing is they're playing the Jewish card. And really that takes us all the way back. The Jewish card has been played in this from the beginning. I remember when speaking with journalistic contacts in the mainstream media just after 9/11, that the word going around the newsrooms, the conspiracy word, whisper, was that Mossad had pulled off 9/11. So it goes back right as far as there when that rumour was spread throughout the news community, off the record, so to speak, that it was a Mossad operation. But they're playing the Jewish card big time, and there are two objectives. One is to insulate the 9/11 issue from the majority, if they can, of the left wing. And the second objective is to lay the groundwork for the destruction of the 9/11 movement in the mainstream media, using anti-Semitism as the basis. They're going to use the Holocaust issue there also. They also hope to use the Jewish issue and the Holocaust issue to sunder apart the 9/11 movement itself, particularly on the right. And everybody's in on this game. Everybody's lining up on opposite sides of this Jewish issue, and so the issue has become an issue about the people themselves, the personalities themselves, not the 9/11 issue anymore. They're fighting with each other, and that's not accidental. That's in order to eventually disillusion those who tune into those radio broadcasts. So we're talking about people like Mike Rivero, Alex Jones, Carl Schwartz, John Stadtmiller, Dylan Avery, Dave Von Kleist, Phil Jahan, etc., etc. And I've got one beautiful clip here from John Stadtmiller's show featuring Dylan Avery of Loose Change, a left-wing production, I think you'll agree, aimed at the left wing on the 9/11 issue. And who else but the creepy Eric Hufschmidt. And here you got it all. The left-right divide, the Jewish issue, the Holocaust issue, and the personality clashes designed to disillusion those who are relying on these people to investigate 9/11.
Is Eric still there? Bring him up. Okay. Now, you heard what he just said.
He said he sold 75,000.
No, you talk to him. Don't talk to me. You talk to him.
Oh, hello, Dylan.
Hello, Eric.
Now, you sold 75,000. See, and you're saying that the Simon family is not helping you?
No, that's ridiculous, Eric. Deborah Simon has never given me $1. She gave me the CBC footage, and that is it. She's never financially contributed to me in any way.
And what about the movie that's coming up then? Who's funding that? How is that happening?
Because we made a good movie, and now Hollywood came to us and asked us.
But who's Hollywood? Who's Hollywood?
Oh, let me guess, Eric. The Jews are Hollywood, right?
No, who? You tell me.
I'm not about to disclose my personal business deals with you.
It's not a personal business deal with me. It's with the world, and they're going to find out when the movie's released.
Yeah, you're right. And then I'll tell them. But right now we haven't signed anything on paper, so I'm not legally allowed to say anything.
All right. KPFK, I know these. I use that example because we both know them. They are not interested in whose DVD is better. They simply don't want to promote me because I mentioned the Holocaust is a hoax.
What are you getting at here, Eric? What is your big deal?
What I'm getting at is you get the promotion because you support the Holocaust. Because
I support the Holocaust. So here you go. I'm a Holocaust.
Okay, are you telling me the Holocaust exists or doesn't? What do you know about it?
What do you know about the Holocaust?
Yes. Tell me how many Jews were gassed in World War II.
I obviously have not spent nearly as much time researching the Holocaust.
You either haven't spent any or you're lying. It's like I said. This is why they promote you.
Let me ask you this, Dylan. Did you actually see this post on his site? I read
we know all about this. Like I said, we had a 1-hour conversation with him about the article, trying to clear it up so he would take it down. And to this day, he still hasn't taken down the article. In fact, according from what I'm hearing, he's actually working on it more.
But some people are taking it upon themselves to rip this movement apart. And I got to tell you what, the globalists, the crapheads out there, they're getting their jollies right now. They're laughing. They're laughing because they're seeing what a fledgling movement is doing to itself.
We have a right to know who you are and what your connections are to Mossad or Israel.
Hey, wait a minute. Did you actually say what I thought I heard you say?
Okay. One of the most interesting things about that is the emotive content. It's full of emotive content. And that's an achievement for them because when emotion comes in, then rationality goes out the window. So this is a brilliantly conceived strategy. While this debate rages in the 9/11 movement, the existence of that debate in the 9/11 movement is being used in order to discredit the 9/11 movement with those on the left. That's happening in blogs and on forums on the internet right now. But that's nothing compared to what's going to come from the mainstream on this issue. Alex Jones hosted the LA Symposium on 9/11. Introduced by Charlie Sheen, by the way, because if you're launching any kind of a movement, you've got to have a movie star. You know, you can't do nothing without a movie star. But there you have Alex Jones, of all people. Now, the problem is that Alex Jones seems to cover the 9/11 issue in detail, but also has these other things that just sort of slip by and you excuse them. Attitudes or attributes or stuff that he talks about. And it doesn't matter too much because the rest of the stuff seems okay. The same applies with, say, Mike Rivero, whatreallyhappened.com. Yeah, okay, he does go on about the Israelis quite a bit, but I mean, there is good information there, you say to yourself as you go to the website. Or Rense.com, yes, they have published stuff about Eric Zundel and Holocaust denial, etc., but I mean, they carry a lot of alternative stuff. However, when it comes to the presentation of those individuals in the mainstream media, they'll make it look like these websites produce nothing but the compromising information. And the operation is determined to cross-link the 9/11 issue and the Holocaust issue. They introduced it through Eric Hufschmidt, and then they're using that to leverage the issue right in there. You might have noticed in that audio something quite clever. A piece of information came out. It came out that there's some kind of connection between Deborah Simon, and the Simon family have got alleged financial ties to Lee Hamilton, who sat on the 9/11 Commission. So that's possibly very interesting information to somebody. Hey, what is this? Links between the maker of Loose Change and a family who's connected to a guy who sits on the 9/11 Commission. But the person who's given that nugget to articulate and publicise is Eric Hufschmidt. So if you're not onto the fact that they're all fakes, you find yourself sitting in the Eric Hufschmidt camp on this issue of what are the connections between the Simon family and Dylan Avery, except that now you're lumbered with the rest of Eric Hufschmidt's stuff, which includes the Holocaust issue. So what they've done is they've used Eric Hufschmidt as an attack dog, contaminated, rabid, a rabid dog, because he's contaminated with the Holocaust issue, but he's used as an attack dog to lever him right into the heart of the 9/11 issue. But you would imagine that Dylan Avery, who's just allegedly some young guy with an interest in 9/11. Maybe he is, but you'd imagine that he would stay a mile away from these people. Who wants to have anything to do, good, bad or indifferent, with Eric Hufschmidt? And yet there's Dylan Avery discussing the issue on air with Eric Hufschmidt, and he's spoken with Eric Hufschmidt not just on one occasion. Those people around Loose Change have had lots of contact with Eric Hufschmidt. Now, either they are very, very dumb, or I leave you to work out the other alternative. So, this is the Jewish card and the Holocaust card. The moon is in there too. Let's get to that in a moment. What they've done is that they have slowly played the Jewish card on these websites, and they have begun to ramp it up. They always make their changes slowly over time, so there's no immediate overt change in editorial stance, but it just creeps in a certain direction, so you don't notice it until you just look around, and suddenly, as you find right now, Holocaust stuff, Jewish stuff is all over, particularly the right-wing alternative media. Now, the timing of all this doesn't just have to do with the 9/11 issue. They're also pushing this issue in the right in the United States. They're also pushing the anti-immigration issue. The idea there is to taint opposition to the immigration into the United States and paint it as racist. That way we're not thinking about the money side of things and unions and labour rights, etc., but we're thinking in terms of racist. But what really gave them the springboard for this was the Israeli invasion of Lebanon. And even prior to that, they were starting to ramp up the anti-Jewish propaganda on the sites that you usually visit to find out stuff about the 9/11 issue. Then, of course, we had the Israeli invasion, and they really went nuts then. And now they have morphed the other side of the Israeli invasion of Lebanon. They've morphed to a point where now 9/11 is a Zionist operation. However, start scratching the surface of the Zionist word, which seems sort of reasonably politically acceptable, and you find the Jew word. And then you're into anti-Semitism territory. And while those cracks may not appear very wide, believe me, they will open as we move on, until we get to the point where they will alienate many of the middle-of-the-road or left-wing listeners, and they will have dragged themselves and their websites and the nature of their coverage completely over to the right. It's around that sort of time that the mainstream media will discover them. Get it? The 9/11 issue, which can hardly get traction in the mainstream media, will discover the issue around the same time that these people arrive in the Holocaust zone and the anti-Semitic zone. So there you go. That's the plan. They're laying the groundwork for a smear job. But there's another good reason for moving the Holocaust issue in with the 9/11 issue. See, the number of people who have doubts about the Holocaust is quite small. The number of people with doubts about 9/11 is substantial. So by trying to conflate the two together, they hope to reduce the credibility of the 9/11 issue and reduce the number of people who think it was an inside job. And the same applies with the moon issue. If you can conflate the two, you can try and use one to take down the other. And wasn't it just amazing that a few weeks into our 3-eye investigation of 9/11, we had the issue of the moon and the issue of the Holocaust both raised on the forum on breakfornews.com. And these two issues are two of the key issues pushed by Eric Hufschmidt. The moon, the Holocaust, and 9/11. So what happened on the Break for News forum was just an attempt to try and drag the Holocaust issue in and the moon issue. So there you go. You've been warned. The Holocaust issue and the moon landing issue, as far as the 9/11 movement are concerned, are a pair of hot cream donuts held out in front of you. They know you just want to reach out and take a bite. But if you do, you're playing their game. Okay, this is Snow Patrol, and you're all that I have. You're on the next level on breakfornews.com, and we'll be right back. And you're very welcome back. You're on the next level on breakfornews.com, and hello to you wherever you are around the world tuning in. Hello to Astrid, by the way, who I know is tuning in. So without further ado, the analysis section of our investigation has now just been opened. There are a number of topics there. We're interested to find out, for example, what you think are the top reasons why 9/11 was an inside job, as they would be presented to the average person in the street. What do you think are the top 10 reasons that are most persuasive. Once again, the reason we're doing this is because unless we do, because of the deep level of compromising of the 9/11 movement by the intelligence agencies, if we don't do it, folks, nobody's going to do it. And now, as they say, for something completely different. There has been an interesting development in the global warming issue, and that's the announcement by Russian scientists that they expect global cooling to begin in 6 to 9 years. It's based on their study of solar activity, and that's why it's interesting and legitimate, because we know that they did ice cores in the Antarctic and measured the levels of solar activity over the last 1200 years or so, and what they found was when solar activity went down, we had mini ice ages here on Earth. So solar radiation, solar output, is the prime determinant of the whole global warming cooling cycle. But don't freak out. They're not expecting the cooling cycle to really get into gear until the 22nd century. Interesting development, as I say. But there is something tying together the global warming issue and the peak oil issue and the ozone hole issue, and I'm going to come to that in a moment. By the way, these topics are posted in the Earth Changes section of the forum. We also have something in from Rolf Martens, that's ROLF-Martens, MARTENS.com. And Rolf approaches things from a class struggle Marxist-Leninist point of view, which I don't share. But hey, Rolf has come up with some interesting angles on both the global warming, peak oil, and the ozone issue. The ozone issue, he says, always was a red herring, and the bans on CFCs were totally unjustified. And he makes some very good points in relation to that. The most telling point he makes as to why all this hype about the ozone layer and the consequent danger from cancer-inducing radiation, why it's all just hype and bullshit, is because the ozone layer, as you probably know if you've been hammered to death with this by the media, it's particularly thin over the poles. And we get a lot of talk about the Antarctic ozone layer and whether it's bigger or whether it's smaller, whether it's increased, whether it's decreased, blah, 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 blah. The point, says Rolf, is this, that at the equator, 50 times as much UV radiation reaches the Earth's surface as at the poles. Right? That's not just more sunshine happening in the equatorial latitudes, but vastly more UV radiation. And for every 10 kilometers that you move away from the equator, the UV radiation decreases by 1% for every 10 kilometers that you move away from the equator. So by the time you get up to the kind of latitudes, or down to the kind of latitudes of the Antarctic so-called ozone hole, it doesn't matter a damn, because there's so little UV radiation coming in at that point. Now, his argument about the ozone hole scare is much bigger than that, but I won't go into it all. You can find that in the forum on breakfornews.com. But what he also points out is that he regards the concentration on CFCs, which he says were refrigerant, that were vital to third world countries, and the issue of peak oil, which he says is a resource which is vital to third world countries, and the issue of global warming are all examples of the intelligentsia and the elite in the West using these environmental issues, using them to restrain the economic growth of the third world. Yeah, as soon as they've ramped up their own economies up to full production, suddenly they get a conscience about the ozone layer and the peak oil and the global warming at exactly the same time as all of this will have the biggest impact on their potential competitors in the less developed world, thereby removing competition and at the same time slowing economic development to make sure they still have a good pool of cheap labour in those countries to service their own economic needs. And you can get more of that resource denial theory on rolfmartens.com. ROLF-Martens, MARTENS.com. Okay, just one more thing I'd like to deal with in this show, and that's cognitive dissonance, a psychological tactic that I believe was used on people at the time of 9/11, and which we should pay a little bit of attention to, because we could perhaps discover ways to reverse the effect of that cognitive dissonance. What am I talking about? It's cognitive dissonance, DISSONANCE. And you can check it out on Wikipedia, or there's a link in the forum. And a lot of it has to do with how people manage to persuade themselves to believe, or are persuaded to believe, things that they don't really believe. The classic cognitive dissonance experiment was done back in 1959, where some students were suckered into doing a really dumb task. They had to take pegs out of holes, put them back in, turn them a quarter turn, take them back out again, put them back. It was totally boring. And then at the end of doing that task, the experimenter told them there was a research assistant missing, and asked them would they mind persuading the next person to do the task. I mean, it's dull, it's boring, it's totally non-interesting, but they asked the people after they'd done it to just persuade some other people. Some of them, they gave them $20 for doing it, which is a pretty good bribe if you're going to persuade somebody to do some meaningless task. Some of them they just gave $1 to, and some of them they gave nothing to. And the results were very interesting. You see, later on, they came back to the people and they asked them how boring had it been after this was all over. The ones who thought it was most boring were the ones who were given the $20. They had a clear external justification to lie, which didn't cause them to change their perception that, hey, that really sucked, that was boring. They lied about the task being interesting to the next person as instructed. They got $20 for it. They knew they were lying, and they had a good reason to lie, $20, and so they retained their impression that it was a boring task. The ones who were only given $1 hadn't really got enough motivation there to explain away why they had been such scum as to go and lie to the next guy. And so in order to resolve that conflict, they actually slightly changed their opinion of it. When they were talking to the next person about it being interesting, they sort of convinced themselves in their own heads that it was interesting. Whereas the people being given the $20, they knew it was bullshit, and they knew why they were getting the $20. Get it? So when people were presented with a subtle choice, they actually changed their mind. Now, I believe a variation of that technique was used on 9/11, and I think one of the classic examples of it was the announcement that the passport of a hijacker had been discovered in the street in New York. It's totally unbelievable when you think about it, right? But it was put out with all of the spin and authority of the government behind it at that time. Just at the point where people might be asking themselves the question as to who actually pulled this off, and was it an inside job, because people aren't totally dumb. Just at that point, the information was released that a hijacker's passport had been found on the street. That was subtle, because on the one hand, it said something that was unbelievable, and on the other hand, it was the government saying it. So it contained a contradiction. Now, there was a lot going on at the time. It was only just one more piece of news at a time when everybody was psychologically traumatized. But I believe it contained that deliberate ambiguity in order to cause people to resolve the conflict by tipping over in favor of saying to themselves, this was an external attack. And perhaps, therefore, one of the keys for us in dealing with the media is to focus their attention back on that incident, back on that issue of the passport, to try and reverse the cognitive dissonance that steered them in to the 9/11 mainstream media propaganda. And perhaps there are other issues where this was used. Maybe you have some more ideas on that. If so, please join in the forum if you're not already a member. Post it in the 9/11 3i investigation section. And by the way, if you do tune into these broadcasts or visit the site, then I would encourage you to join in the forum, because this is very much a hands-on participation kind of thing. And also, if you do visit and listen regularly and you haven't donated, I'd encourage you to do so. There's a PayPal button on the homepage of breakfornews.com. Okay, that's it for this edition. I will be back shortly with more, and I do hope that you can join me for that. But in the meantime, for breakfornews.com,